Welcome to Motorcycle Transmission 1. I'm your host, Tom Bieler. If you want to know more about me, go to homeagain.com. But right now, we're talking to Mr. Scott Danielewicz. Hey, Scott, thanks for coming on with me today.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me.
So, me and Scott, we've known each other for what, about 15 or 20 years, something like that?
Yeah, probably 20 years.
Probably 20, okay. So, when I was coming up in the industry, Scott was still a little bit younger than me, and I think I originally met him through shops I worked at, probably.
I,
Because I was at Western New York Cycle. I think your dad, at least I know, was in there. And then I was at Hebler's a little bit after I closed up my first shop.
yeah, it probably was the Honda shop when I was a little kid.
Just a little kid
Oh,
back then.
I was a big kid, but
So Scott is someone who's been in the local industry pretty much his whole life, and he was my top pick for guests for this podcast. No offense to my other guests, of course. Um, Let me get a little bit of background about you growing up and your family's involvement in power sports, and just kind of. I know you were into dirt back then, but let's kind of just see what got everything started for you.
so I guess my family owns a farm, and my dad was a dirt bike racer back in the day, and there was always dirt bikes sitting in the barn, and I was always kind of interested in it, and we had a four-wheeler, and I used to ride that around a lot when I was a kid, and you know basically I was hooked from there. That's all I really wanted to do all the time when I was a kid was, go over to the farm with my dad and see if I could ride the four-wheeler. And he got me into dirt bikes then because he was a dirt bike guy, and four-wheelers are kind of frowned upon from the from the dirt bike community. So I got into the dirt bikes, and we got into, me and my brother both got into racing when we were young, and that's all we wanted to do. Like, no other sports, no, I played baseball, I played football when I was a kid, but riding the dirt bikes was what I always wanted to do. And I wanted to be like my dad, and that's just how it went.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that about the four wheelers because I always, uh, the comparison that always comes to my mind is when I was in high school and I used to skateboard. We used to like look at the rollerbladers in the same way that like two-wheel dirt guys look at four-wheel dirt guys. It's kind of like the second best or the runner-up kind of thing about it. So growing up, were you actually racing competitively or just trail riding or?
Yeah, so when I started out, we were just trail riding, and we had a little track that my dad made at the farm, and I rode that a lot. And then I got into hare scrambles, which is like cross country type woods racing, and my dad bought me a YZ80. It was a 1993, and he took me to look at it, and it was the first bike we looked at, and I was like, yeah, I want it. And it was kind of not very good, and then he was mad at me because I wanted this bike that needed all this work. And basically, by the time he fixed everything for me to make it like a respectable bike, we could have just bought a new one.
Sure, yeah.
But, I was an anxious kid that I just wanted that, I wanted to have the cool bike, and, I wanted it. And then we started racing the hare scrambles, and for the first couple of years I wasn't very good, and I almost didn't like it because the terrain was hard, and like all the terrain where I rode was like flat, and we'd go to these races and there was these monster hills that I'd never seen before. And after a few years of going to them and doing them, um, I got better at it, and I started to get fast, and then I you know really really liked it, and it's like it was almost like addicting.
Yeah.
I always wanted to be faster. And over the years I ended up was a decent B rider. And
What's a B rider?
so it's like intermediate, like,
Okay, so is it class of racing?
yeah, there's different rankings.
Yeah.
So yeah, I ended up being like a B rider, and just injuries and stuff like that prevented me. I could have bumped up to A, but I just you're always trying to sandbag to get the trophies. But
So I think with picking up any new hobby, it's funny because when you pick up a new hobby and you're not that good at it, it's not that fun, and you have to have some kind of discipline and determination to get past that point to where you're good enough at it to where you start to enjoy it and start to see real progress, and then you start beating guys, and then you start really having a lot of fun. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And you pretty much rode motocross pretty much all through childhood and high school and everything.
yeah, I when I started racing, I was probably about 13 or 14. The when I started riding at the farm on the four-wheeler, I would say, I was probably like 10.
Yeah.
And I'm 37 now, and I still race a little bit, and I still ride off road. I
What
really
kind of races do you currently get into?
so this year I decided it was a good idea to do it's called the Northeast 24-hour challenge, and it's a 24-hour dirt bike race. And my friends kind of talked me into it. We rode it as a team. I basically haven't raced in 5 years prior to that.
Okay.
And
this was recent, right? I think
yeah,
I remember you telling me about this.
Yeah, that was this summer.
Okay.
And I bought a brand new dirt bike because I wanted to have the top of the line, best of everything.
What is the best dirt bike alive right now?
I mean, I got the Beta 300 Race Edition, which is a 302 stroke electric start, really good off road bike. I do love it, but basically I was not prepared physically for that.
Right.
That
it takes
feat.
a lot of conditioning to do
Yeah.
these races. So in a 24-hour race like that, and you said you raced as a team. So how many people on the team? What is each leg of the race look like? How many hours are you going at a time? Are you sleeping? Can you? I mean, that's a long time to even think about. I mean, if I'm driving in my truck for 8 hours, I'm ready to,
So that 24-hour race, this time we did it with a team of 6 people, and luckily the other guys were really prepared because they carried us through it. I was basically dead weight other than helping with mechanical issues and that type of thing.
You're pretty good with mechanical issues, I've heard.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing, I guess. But it was an experience. I don't know if I would do it again, but the course, it was like a 12-mile woods loop. And
you're just going around the same course the whole 24 hours.
Yep. And basically the team, you could switch off whenever you wanted with
Okay.
we all rode our own bike, so we had 6 bikes, but you could ride if you wanted to do 2 laps, you could do 2 laps. If you wanted to do 7 laps, you could do 7 laps.
Okay.
They were 30 to 40-minute laps. So realistically, you could only do 3 to 4 laps on what your bike could hold in fuel.
Sure. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So you might as well at least switch out when you're refueling.
Yeah, and guys on my team, they would go sleep, and whoever was riding, and then I actually ended up staying awake the whole time so I could wake up the next guy to get ready. And we had it organized pretty good. We ended up doing pretty well. I mean, obviously we didn't win, which is what we were there to do, but for a bunch of guys that we haven't really ridden a lot, and we were all in our 30s, we were happy to walk away just uninjured.
I think it's pretty cool that you still ride dirt. I mean, I never was a dirt rider, as you know. The anecdote I always come back to talking about why that is on the dirt, you never have traction, but when you do, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And on the street, you always have traction, and when you don't, you're in trouble. So to me, riding in the dirt is exactly the opposite of street riding, and I'm unable to turn off my instincts. So if you ever see me on a dirt bike, you're probably going to see me go to the hospital next, So for some reason, when you became an adult, you ended up wanting to get in the motorcycle industry, which is not something I ever recommend to any young people with promise and potential. But what career choices did you make early on that got you into being in the industry full time?
So when I was younger into racing, there are local shop Pebblers that me and Tom later ended up working together. Um, Basically, they came to me and they needed like a wash boy, to do.
Like a lock eye, yeah.
Yeah. So, instead of going into a restaurant or a fast food or something, I'm like, oh, this will be cool. I'll be, working with motorcycles
Yeah.
because that's what I wanted to do. Um, so I started doing that, washing stuff, and then um, started like winterizing jet skis and other small stuff. And I think they kind of realized quick that I wasn't really your average kid
Sure,
because
yeah. And they probably already knew your dad.
yeah.
So for anybody listening, Scott's dad is one of the best in the area. He's a very good mechanic and a very good person as well. And he kind of had everybody in the industry around here knows Bruce and thinks highly of him.
Yeah, so that, I mean, kind of following in the footsteps of him, in being around, racing, he was taking care of all my stuff. And, I was always right there with him in the garage, asking him, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Why? And I'm sure he wanted to kill me half the time because, I'm asking him every possible stupid question probably as a kid. But, I had seen a lot. He did a lot of engines. He's really good with suspension. So I learned suspension really early on from him.
Which
And
some people never learn.
right. And that's one of the most important things of the
It's
bike.
absolutely the most important.
So
But it's not as cool to look at or listen to. But
no, all those, the shims and all that stuff inside, you can't see it, so it doesn't look cool.
you're
But
right.
if it's not working good, you're not going fast.
Yeah. I would like to talk more about performance suspension later on, but yeah, we could definitely get into that. So you started out Hevlers doing kind of lot boy stuff, probably eventually started doing setups and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And then pretty much at this point, you're stuck in the motorcycle industry, right? Worked at a couple shops over the years and stuff like that. And then eventually, the stars all aligned, and we both worked together at Vaz Cycle City in Tonawanda, which is where I became very fond of Scott because we had such a fucking good time working there. And there's probably 10,000 inside jokes we could tell right now that nobody listening would ever understand. So we'll try to avoid some of those, or at least maybe clarify what they are. But when you were working in the industry and you came to work at Vaz, which is primarily a street motorcycle shop, we weren't doing any dirt bikes or four wheelers there. Actually, maybe we did a couple plows on quads once in a while, but you still didn't even have a street bike at this point, right?
I think I had a supermoto for a little while
Okay, yeah,
prior
yeah.
to that, but I kind of got myself in trouble on the street. Because it's like riding a dirt bike, just doing wheelies, having a good time, and the police don't like that apparently.
Well, so back then, supermotos were pretty new, and a lot of the police didn't even understand that they were street bikes. So they would pull you over just because they thought you were on an off-road bike, and that happened to a lot of friends of mine back then. And it was just like a brand new thing, and of course, everybody that had a supermoto back then, I mean, the guys who were buying them were the guys that were riding pretty sporty.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously with my dirt bike background, I wanted a street bike for transportation and I mean to have fun. And it's a dirt bike with street wheels, so that
Yeah.
fit me well, and I was comfortable on it, and yeah, that was my first street bike technically, but I had it for probably 2 years and then I got rid of it because I couldn't go out of my driveway without getting pulled over because the police knew it, and it was fun.
It's funny that like growing up and being young, it's like every time you're out, you're getting pulled over. And I think the only time I've gotten pulled over in the past couple of years was with you last fall. Maybe we can tell that story later. Um, so all right, so let me think of some funny stories from Voss. So my first one I have to bring up because this is gonna play a lot later. But so at Voss we were mostly working on Harley Davidsons, general maintenance, ape hanger bars, maybe some stereos, tires, brakes, oil, stuff like that. a lot of chrome accessories, stuff like that. And Scott used to say this thing, and I was riding street at the time, and I think I was into like the Street Fighter sport bikes at the time. And Scott used to compliment guys on Harleys, and he used to say, "Man, you got to really have some balls to get on this thing and go out into traffic and just be a sitting duck." what exactly did you mean by that when you used to say that back then?
Well, so I used to say that I was into metric stuff, and I worked on a lot of sport bikes, and stuff like that. Not only the dirt bikes, like into the sport bikes, snowmobiles, all the metric stuff. And I was for sure a diehard metric person. And when I started there, I rode a Harley, it might even been an Evo or an 88 twin cam, and I was shocked on how slow it was. Like the things could barely get out of their own way in
Yeah.
stock form. And that's kind of where that reference went to. It was like, if you went on the throughway, could the thing even go 80 miles an hour?
Right. If you had to stop, could you?
No.
If you had to get out of the way of something, could you? If you had to accelerate to get out of danger, could you? And basically, and you're right. The answer is no on a lot of these old Evos and stuff like that. And obviously Harley kind of picked up on what people are saying about that kind of thing, and eventually ended up trying to improve the performance of their machines. But I always thought that was so funny, especially leading up to what you're doing now, which we will get into. Um, the other story I think is so funny is, do you remember when we used to go scrap metal?
Oh yeah.
So Scott grew up in a farming family, and farmers always have a lot of heavy metal around, and they're too busy to get rid of it, and they don't, not a big deal. So I got into scrapping back in the day as a way to make a few bucks, and this is back when scrap money was pretty good. And I just had a Toyota Tacoma at the time, and I'd fill up my bed, and I'd have maybe $100 worth of scrap in there, and $100 back then wasn't too bad anyway. But at some point, Scott says, we should go scrap some weekend with a couple dump trailers and make some real money. So I says, all right, so I found somebody that had a dump trailer I could borrow, and Scott had a truck and trailer and everything like that. And then in one weekend, I think we took two separate loads with two separate vehicles and rigs. And I think by the end of the weekend, we both had like $1,000 cash in our pocket, which was a ton of money because this would have been in maybe like 2011. You're thinking, right?
Somewhere in there? Yeah, probably 20.
No, it had to be earlier than that. No, I guess maybe you're right.
Yeah, it probably was.
But I mean, it wasn't a lot of fun, but it was a good way to make some side money. And we just always used to seem to have fun no matter what the hell we were doing. But yeah, I don't know why I wanted to bring up the scrapping thing. But
yeah.
One of my fond memories of just being that age, making $1,000 just driving around, loading up heavy metal and stuff. And now we both like lift weights as a hobby, which there's no money in that, but we just pick up heavy metals for no reason now. But well, I guess not for no reason, but so at some point in your career has led you to pretty much where you're at right now, where you own a shop with your partner Adam Clark, who you and him go way back, and me and Adam go back too, but not quite as far as you guys do.
Yeah, so Adam, I mean, me and Adam basically, we pretty much could be brothers. I mean, I remember when he was the first one out of my friend group to get their driver's license, and we'd go riding and stuff all the time. And I mean, it got to the point where Sunday morning I'd be at my house sleeping, and he's there hanging out with my dad in the kitchen, basically waiting for me to get up to go in the garage and tinker with our dirt bikes, because basically if I was going to a race, he was right there with me. He did that for a long time with us, but kind of my dad kind of took him under his wing as well, learning stuff when we were younger, because Adam got a dirt bike, and my dad's looking at it and going, you can't ride it like this. And
he is that way.
And pretty much my dad showed us race prep and how important it is for everything to work right. And I think at one point Adam's bike blew up, and my dad's like, "We'll take it apart. We'll get it all right, and it won't be too bad. Like it's not a bad bike." And you know that went on for years and years and years of me and Adam buying something that's basically junk, and we weren't afraid to do it because we knew we had the guidance of
Yeah.
no matter what mess we got into, he could bail us out if it was too deep. So I wasn't afraid to dig into anything because I knew that I had my dad to bail me out of it.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh,
Sometimes taking stuff apart, you can stress out if you don't know what you're getting into. For
oh,
sure.
oh yeah, and I'm sure some of the stuff he had to absolutely hate us when we mess it up, break a bolt or something, and then try to drill it out, and it's stuff that I deal with to this day with customers sometimes.
Yeah. No, to this, like if I have, so for instance, like Harley cylinder exhaust studs, they rust. You can't get on them at the right angle half the time, and you snap them right off. Okay, I couldn't tell you how many phone calls I got, and every single time I say, "Well, here's what I'm going to quote you for. I'm going to quote you for taking your head off and dropping it off at a machine shop to fix your fuck off." And then I said, "Oh, I'm going to charge you to put it back together, and I'm going to charge you whatever the machine shop charges." But if it's my own bike, I might take the drill to a motor part, but probably not on a customer's bike. I just don't want the liability of it. And it doesn't take much for a drill to go sideways, especially when you're drilling into something that's broken off in there. That's a harder metal like steel. So.
or when they break the easy out off into it and then decide to bring it to you.
Don't even talk about. We're not even. No, it's supposed to be a positive podcast. We're not talking about that because I know about that too much, and it's usually my easy out that's in there actually. So you go way back with Adam. So what happened to where you guys actually said, you know what, let's just open up the shop?
So I was working at shops, and I think, as we said earlier, it's not a career that I would recommend if you want to get rich.
It's not. And even for the dealers, these guys are millionaires. You know what I mean? Like people think, oh man, they own a dealership, they must be rich. These guys aren't upper middle class at best.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're worried about paying their bills, and it's nice when you're able to make a career working for them. And I think they really do have the best intentions, but it's just not an industry where there's $1 million to spend on employees. You have to want to do it. You have to know that you could make better money elsewhere and just still choose it for the love of it.
Yeah. So I was working in the industry, and part of the reason why I stayed in the industry was because the deal that I made with every shop that I worked at was, Wednesday nights I would go to practice for dirt bikes, and I would say, hey, I need to leave at like 3 so I can get to practice. Yeah. And then I raced on the weekends, so I wasn't working weekends.
Right.
So they were understanding of that because I'm doing something involved in the industry, and that's why I stayed in it. And after a while, I was starting to get older, and I'm like, man, I'm really not making enough money to move forward. And kind of my goal was to work at some shops, learn as much as I could while I was there.
Yeah.
From other mechanics, from I went to a lot of schooling like Polaris, Yamaha, Honda.
Oh, dealerships that you worked
yeah,
at?
when I worked at
the factory training.
Yeah, so I mean, I learned some stuff from that. I learned a lot from my dad, and I learned a lot from doing stuff. And even when I would go home from work, I'd either be doing a side job, or I have a motorcycle collection problem, so I'm never without a project my entire life.
Sure, yeah.
And Adam was he was a Ford Master Tech, and he was Western New York working on cars. He got rust, and he was just getting sick of that stuff, and he had some back problems. So one day I kind of went to him, and I'm like, hey, like, we're pretty good at what we do. Like, why are we working so hard for somebody else when basically we're the go-to guys at the places we work for, that if there was a problem, they'd come to you, hey, what should I do, where should I go? Like, we knew all that, we had all the contacts, we both have tons of tools. So sure. I said, let's do this.
Yeah.
Like, knowing nothing about business, knowing nothing about anything other than how to fix the machines, we just jumped in head first. And it was tough at first, but, you know, I mean, it's still tough, but it's manageable now. And
Yeah, and it's probably worth the tough times because you're doing it for yourself.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
And,
there's between the both of us, there's definitely some passion about the industry.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, I cannot go to any bike night all summer without seeing Adam there. Like he's out talking to you guys, setting up tables, and just being like I've seen him. Like he actually, there was a time he asked me to cover your table at your tent because he was gonna go get some tools out of his truck and go help a guy in the parking lot who needed like I forget what the hell guy had some problem with his primary or something. I don't know what it was, and Adam's like, man, I'll help you, sure, and I mean, he come back 45 minutes later, and I don't even know if it was fixed or not. You know what I mean? Because they probably ate a couple hot dogs and drank about 8 beers in the time he was gone. But just he's a great guy. So the name of your shop is A Plus Performance, right?
Yep.
And you guys are in Lockport, New York.
Yep, we're in
And when you
Lockport.
first started out, what kind of jobs were you taking in, and what were your business goals when you first opened up?
So when we first started, I think I was more nervous of, are we going to have enough work to cover, we were renting.
Like work,
we were
right?
renting at the time. So, I'm pretty familiar with a lot of different types of bikes, jet skis,
Yeah.
snowmobiles,
Off-road.
all that stuff. So
Yeah.
basically, when we first started, we would work on just about anything.
Sure.
And it was okay. It was enough to pay the bills. It was sometimes stressful. I'd get into older bikes and, they snowball into a nightmare and you regret taking the job in. But
I don't know anything about that for the record.
We started with that, and I would say we were like 50% V twin and 50% metric, whatever it was. And, I think my goal was more of the V twin because I had gotten a Harley and I'd gotten into doing some performance stuff.
So at this point, you'd already got into street riding.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had been.
And what were you riding at the time when you opened the shop?
So I had a 2000 Electric Glide that basically I had it all stripped down.
The orange one?
It was the black one.
The black one.
I actually bought it when we worked together at Vaz.
Oh, the orange one is a road glide.
Yeah.
No, you bought it after I left Vaz.
Okay.
Yeah, because. But anyway, yeah. Point of the story is, so you had a Harley at this point. You're working on off-road snowmobiles. You're putting plows on ATVs. You're doing tires on metric, oil change on metric. And actually, you did work on some old stuff. And some of that stuff's come through my shop, and all the work you guys did was like real nice. To be honest, I had a guy with a XS 850, and he came in and he said he wanted a carb clean. And I said, sure, no big deal. I can clean carbs all day. I do clean carbs all day. And he rode the thing in, and I'm thinking, okay, why does he need a carb clean? And then when he put his kickstand down, the thing was just purring perfectly, with no choke on or nothing like that, with a nice low idle. And I said, why do you think you need the carbs clean? He's like, oh, shouldn't they just be done once in a while? And I'm like, not if you don't have the problem, I go, who worked on them already? He said, oh, Scott did them over at A Plus. And I said, well, that's why it runs so good, But so obviously, and when I started my shop too, it's like, I'm pretty much going to work on anything, even if it's not something I want to do, because, at the end of the day, bills have to get paid no matter what. You can't really tell the collectors that you just, sorry, I could have had the money if I worked on the side-by-side, but I just don't want to, But at some point along the line, you guys really started to get into Harley performance, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's our kind of our main thing now.
Now, was that always the goal, or did it happen organically, or how did it go down?
It really wasn't the goal at first. Obviously off road is where my heart has always been.
Yeah.
And that's really what I wanted to do, was like race prep and that type of stuff. But it doesn't pay the bills very well, and there's not a lot of people that do it. And it's mostly younger kids that,
Don't have any money.
they don't have a ton of money. So when I
Yeah.
tell them, hey, you need a crank and, you need valves and all that stuff, they're like, oh my God, I can't afford that. And,
Yeah.
you know, then you spend a lot of time being everybody's hero trying to make it happen for them. And it, unfortunately, that didn't, I still do it a little bit for, there's some guys out there that are my age that are still riding that they know that, I'm handy with dirt bikes,
Yeah.
but I don't advertise that at all.
No, I'm with you there. Like if I'm slow in the winter and my buddy calls me up and he says he needs the carbs cleaned on his sled, like I'm gonna take the job and I tell him, I say, don't tell anybody I did this because I don't want 10 sleds in my driveway tomorrow, you know. But like going back to what you're saying, like it's nice to be able to help people out when you can, but it's certainly not a business model
No.
because I have a few clients that I you know to me it's a luxury to be able to help certain people, but you certainly can't help everybody that comes in. Your business, not a charity.
Yeah. Yeah, for
So
sure.
so how did like the evolution into Harley performance start? Did you just start doing some jobs, or did you start with your own bike, or did you start advertising it and then it built from there? Like, because going from just a history of dirt and saying that I would never get on a street bike because that is just a dangerous thing to do, and then getting to the point where you're building Harley race bikes. I mean, something must have happened there. Or actually, I can probably predict what it is. So I know who you are. You know what I mean? Like you are a very meticulous mechanic. Probably one of the most meticulous I've ever worked with and known. And if you have your dirt bike, it's going to be squared away. It's going to have the brakes working perfect. It's going to have the clutch working perfect. It's going to have the fueling figured out perfect. It's going to have the suspension dialed just in. So my prediction is that basically once you start to get into street, you had to perfect the engineer's mistakes. Or maybe they weren't engineer's mistakes, but production costs obviously are considered for factory, so they're never going to put like top level parts on any production bike.
Yeah. So basically, I have a problem where I take things and I look at it and I say, how could they have done this better? And then I change it to that. And, I had bought a Harley with intentions of cleaning it up and selling it to make some money.
Just to
And
flip it, okay.
and I didn't really, at the time we were working at Vaz and well, I was, and we did a lot of bolt-on accessories and stuff. And I bought this bike really not no, it was just cheap. It was like a
It
deal
was the
that,
right deal. You could have passed it
yeah,
up.
like
Yeah.
I lowballed the guy like half, and he was like, yeah. So I'm like, all right.
So you probably didn't even think you were buying it because you thought he was going to
No,
stretch it down.
no. And then I was like, well, I can't not buy it for that because I could probably just clean it up and make 2 grand.
Yeah.
And that was my intention. And I ended up taking the thing for a ride. And it was, at the time, it was the fastest Harley that I had ever ridden by far.
Your own.
Yeah,
Okay.
that the one that I had bought, that 2000 Electric Glide.
Yeah.
And then, as I kind of got into it, I realized that it had some Screaming Eagle heads on it. It had some carb mods. It had pretty big cams. It had a higher compression 95 kit. It had a different ignition on it. And, the guy basically never mentioned anything about that. And I didn't know too much about him.
Yeah.
And, I actually ended up breaking the belt on it like the second time I rode it. And, I got a replacement belt because back then chain drives weren't really a thing yet.
Right. Yeah.
And then I broke that belt in a few hundred miles. And then I put another one on. And at the time, like our drag rep was like, you'll never break this belt. I can't. It was some kind of BDL belt that was supposed to be the greatest thing in the world. It lasted about 200 miles.
Yeah.
And, I was doing burnouts and wheelies and stuff on it. And that wasn't like a common thing like it is now back then.
Right. No, I know.
So I was like, I'm done with the belt thing. And
Yeah.
I realized that like an old shovel head sprocket was the same bolt pattern. And then the 5-speed splines were the same as older 5-speed that came with the chain drive. And I put the 530 chain conversion on it, and then it was just me being a dirt bike rider. I was just always just beating the daylights out of
And
the
how
bike.
did the chain hold up?
Good. It was
Yeah.
on it. I owned that bike for 12 years, and it was on it till the day I got. It's probably still on it.
Yeah. Whenever I talk to guys that ride Harley, um, I will find that half the guys have never had a problem with a belt and they don't know the difference. And then I would say the other half of the guys, well, no, I guess it's not a half and half thing. So maybe it's like thirds. So like a third of the guys don't know the difference because they're just riding to the grocery store and back. A third of the guys have had such good luck with belts that they would never even consider chain because why fix something that's not broken? And then you got the guys that as soon as they get the bike, they're putting a chain on before they even change the oil. But it's funny that you had to kind of do the research and figure out, bolt patterns on the wheel and all that stuff because, me being into vintage, I can relate because, you have 1 year bike and they don't make any parts for it supposedly, but then you start, checking into OEM part numbers, cross-referencing between models, and then eventually you figure out that, oh, this bike has the same output shaft as this one, and now I could just put this or that on it, and it's funny, but that's how you figure a lot of stuff out, and that's probably one of the qualities about a person that's gonna make or break them in this industry too. Because if you just say, "Oh, I can't do that," there's gonna be, I mean, then you can't do it, right? I mean, anytime anyone says, "Oh, I can't do that," I say, "Oh, not with that attitude," because that's really what it's all about. Like, there's always a will and a way,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've always been a big person on you. If you want to, you'll figure out a way.
Yeah,
Like and it just always came down to that. And to get back to like how I got into the Harley performance was that there were a lot of flaws with the bike that I kind of brought out by being overly abusive to it, that
yeah,
I kept breaking. I mean, I've blown up my share of motors, and I assessed why that was the weak point and how I could make it better. And
right,
then back in those days I learned a lot about that type of stuff.
yeah. So going off of that, the next thing I want to get into is basically I want to get into more detailed explanation on how are you modifying these Harley Davidsons, what models are you getting into that you're modifying, and what are the parts you're putting on them, what are the suspension systems you're putting on them. Just kind of like an overview of, if someone brings in a bike and says, "Hey, I got this amount of money to spend on it," where do you want their money to go?
So when a customer comes in and they're looking to make their Harley better, my first thing, what do you have for suspension? That's always going to be my first go-to, is like, let's make this thing ride good. So the Harleys are notoriously undersprung in the forks, and I personally think the rear shocks are on the harsher side. Like, not that they're too stiff, but the action just is not good. And some of the older ones, and by older to me I'm talking like 99 to 13, they had like a air shock that was
Oh,
just,
and the Tourings?
you might as well just throw them
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
So that's the
Just
first.
JB Weld the air thing right out of there.
Yeah,
Just
they're
filling lines
they're
out
just
there.
they're just terrible. And so that's always my first thing. And with anybody, I try to get what's your end goal with the bike? What are you doing with it? Because not everybody is going out and road racing like we are,
Sure.
where you don't need oversized brake rotors. You don't need a lot of the I build sport bike front ends for them, like
Yeah.
they're $5,000. Like, not
Right. No, I
everybody,
know.
no, you don't need that. But you know what? If you want it to be cool to your buddies, or if you do ride hard, I got it. Spent a lot of time developing it. Um,
So you developed your own front end.
yeah, I
So
work.
for anybody that's not knowledgeable on this, uh, Harley, for the most part, has always used damper rod forks, which has kind of always been around since the 60s, probably, or maybe earlier, where basically the fork fluid on compression is just going through holes in what they call a damper rod, and that's what's slowing down the actual damping. And then you have a spring which actually supports the weight of the machine. Newer machines have what they call cartridge forks. A lot of those are what they call upside down forks, where you'd see on sport bikes, where like the wider part of the fork body is up top and the narrower chrome or plated side is at the bottom. And with that, the fluid travels through this valving system, which is a lot more refined and precise and more tunable. So basically, what Scott's going to explain now is the front ends that he develops are top of the line modern technology cartridge forks.
Yeah, so they're basically based off of a Showa big piston fork, which would be on like a 2009 and newer GSXR. I use their
I have to
internals.
correct you actually, only because you should know. I think the first big piston fork on a street bike was the '08 ZX10.
It probably was, but I know like a lot of my R&D came from the Suzuki parts.
Okay.
I also use like I make my own fork lug where you don't have to do any. It'll adapt to the Harley wheel, the rotor spacing, the rotor size overall, and then you use the GSXR Brembos on it.
Okay. Okay.
And then we also developed a triple clamp that's a reduced trail, so you get better input, if you're riding corners and stuff.
So you're changing the angle of the steering neck with that part?
I
For less rake.
Yeah, basically less. Well, it's the same rake. I actually changed the offset to have a overall lower trail number.
So it's a shorter wheelbase but the same angles?
Yeah,
Gotcha,
because under, it's some of the stuff it gets complex, but under
it really does. Yeah.
under with a like we use a certain degree rake still, so then when they call it trail braking, so when you're braking into a corner and the front's dipping, you're reducing trail even more, so then you still have some straight line stability, but then when you're trail braking into a corner, it's going to want to tip in easier. So a lot went into that.
And this is a lot of stuff that nobody even thinks or cares about unless you're really looking for the best.
Right. And the whole reason, for the street, a lot of that stuff is unnecessary.
Come on.
But, you get into the mountain riding and the canyon guys out west and stuff like that, it's a significant difference, in it's just, we developed it on the track, with our involvement in racing.
So most guys that come in, you're telling them, hey, let's put the money in suspension. How does that usually go over with your average guy that walks in?
So I mean, the average.
What do you quote these guys if they just want like a basic level 1 suspension upgrade? You're doing like drop-in cartridges and replacement shocks, or
so either like Race Tech, they've been around. They make a gold valve, a cartridge emulator. That's a good low budget option.
I have that in my KZ1000.
Yeah, and some bikes, that's all you can really get for it.
Sure.
But there's other companies out there that make like a drop-in cartridge. Like I do a lot with a company called Geezer Engineering.
Okay.
It's a small company, and the guy is just great with everything. I help him with some testing, and he takes my input and makes changes if necessary, but he has a really great product at a really good price. So that's usually my go-to cartridge and shock.
He does shocks too.
Yep. He actually is the one that makes the triple trees and everything that we use.
So the Geezer Engineering sounded familiar because I know that a lot of the triple clamps you were using to put your forks on were coming from him, right?
Yep.
So now he builds his own shocks from scratch?
He engineers them, has them machined at the pieces at different machine shops, and then
but he's
it's his
right,
it's his own it's his own thing.
Wow,
and
cool.
he makes a really great product. So that's usually my go-to for your average guy. It's overkill. It's a remote. He makes a remote reservoir shock, and for the price, it's the best thing out there for the price for sure, without a doubt in my mind.
So to set up like your average like dyno touring with his front end and back end, what's that usually cost for your average
I
guy?
mean, I think a set of his cartridges are about 650, and then I think his shocks are about 900 for the remote reservoir shock. That's a really good price. And then,
Yeah,
obviously it takes a few hours of labor,
sure.
fork
A couple hours
seals.
for the front end and the
Yeah,
back end probably just a little bit quicker because you're just bolting them out,
yeah.
right?
So we get a lot of guys. That's kind of my first thing, and everybody, you want the sound. So obviously a 2-in-1 exhaust on the Harley is what I.
Whoa, brother! Did you just speak blasphemy against true duels?
There,
Because
there.
when I was coming up in the Harley scene, man, everybody wanted true duels. And I'm not a Harley guy, you know that. I like all motorcycles, and there's plenty of Harleys I would own. But what? So tell me a little bit about this, because in my scene, it's either like 4 into 2 into 1, or it's 4 into 4, or it's 4 into 1. And normally with exhaust on the stuff that I'm working on, the sooner you get all the different cylinders collecting into one outlet, it's going to usually rob a little low end and give you a bunch of top end. Are you seeing that with the 2 into 1, or what are you seeing when you put something like that on? And you're like either taking off like the true duals or the factory crossover pipe or whatever.
The 2-in-1, I mean, it generally outperforms the dual all around.
And
Um,
there's no question about that.
yeah,
The numbers are out there.
yeah, and I mean, we have a dyno at the shop. We do dyno tuning, and we do a lot of. I mean, between me and Adam, we have too many bikes, and a lot of our engine combos are tried and true on our own things over the years. We know what works. We know what pipe works good with what cam, with what air intake, and
Yeah,
we've spent countless hours on the dyno changing. I mean, my own bike, I've changed, you know, four four different pipes on it, 4 or 5 different intakes, kind of all in one day to see what made the best. And we try a lot of things, and that's why if somebody comes to us, we'll ask, what kind of riding do you do, what do you expect out of
yeah,
it, what's your end goal, and we're able to guide you into what is going to suit your budget to what you want, because we've done a lot of testing.
yeah. And that's really the right way to do it, because sometimes it sucks to like sell someone something less than what they're actually after, because they come in thinking that they want something, and you kind of say, well, your money would be better spent doing this or that. You know what I mean? But going back to the engines, because I can take an engine apart and put it back together, and I don't mind putting performance parts on an engine. But the real secret that a lot of people don't want to spend the extra time and the money and the failures, because failures is how you learn, is the actual engine blueprinting. And that is something you guys offer that I do not offer, nor will I ever offer it. And I think you remember last winter I was telling you about. I had a customer with XL 1200, or actually it was an XL 883 technically, and he had about $6,000 worth of parts from Hammer Performance, which is a huge sporty and Buell performance guy. And I told the customer, I go, here's the thing: is I didn't put all these parts together and say they're all going to work together. I could put them all in, and it's going to run however it's going to run. It's not up to me how it runs, but I can tell you it'll be put together right. And it did end up running really, really good, so I was happy about that. But a lot of people don't understand how dangerous it is for a guy that has like a performance parts catalog and a big budget, because he will just buy whatever he thinks is going to be the best component for each part of the motor. And a lot of times when you put all those things together, it is a disaster. So, talk a little bit about let's just talk about the extreme, like what is the best, baddest motor you guys build? Because I know you have packages. What's it cost? What parts you putting on it? Like, I want to hear, and I know there's a lot of secrets that you can't tell, and I know you guys have a lot of proprietary stuff that you guys develop on your own. But give me a good overview of, someone comes in with a modern, uh, big twin, M8 or twin cam, and they say, I got the budget for whatever you guys want to do. How much are you having these guys spend? What mods are you doing?
So I would say if somebody came in with an open budget, if we're talking Milwaukee 8 touring bike, I'm going to go with probably for pump gas, I'm going to go with like a 12, low 12 to 1. I'm going to do a 143 cubic inch, which is big,
Yeah,
but
obviously,
there's no replacement for displacement. We all know that. And, I'm going to go with a 143. We're going to do the crank.
So you stroke and bore to get the 143?
So a 143 is a 4.5 stroke, which is stock on a 114 or a 117 M8.
So you're just boring on that.
So and then we go to a 4.5 bore, which is you're required to bore the engine cases, and then
to make room for the bigger piston to come through.
Yeah, I mean the cylinder won't even fit down in that big of a cylinder won't even fit down in the case. About a 131 or a 135, depending on your crank, is the biggest you can go without boring the cases.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the 143 would definitely be my go-to, but it's more than just the big bore. You can't run a stock crankshaft with that. So we either put H-beam rods in it, or the stock rods handle quite a bit of power. But if you really want the cool guy factor, you get some Carrillo H-beam rods. We eliminate the counterbalancer, balance the crank. We put a tighter tolerance crank pin in it, and then we weld that in, plug it. A lot of people say plug, weld, balance, crank. That's kind of what they mean. And that gives you a solid foundation, and
to be able to build the power
on top. I will always recommend that to start with, because the crank is one of the biggest fail points on those motorcycles.
And that's the biggest pain in the ass, because everything coming apart.
Yeah. I mean,
especially because a Harley splits side to side the cases.
Yeah,
right?
It's not a clamshell. It's not a clamshell.
Boards, you can get the crank from the bottom end.
Yeah. So that, and then like +2 mm valves in the heads.
Yeah. So on the heads, I was going to ask you. So you got your crank, you got your overbore. What are you doing for heads?
We do some in-house head stuff, but we work with a couple other places, Revolution Performance, Vance and Hines Motorsports, which is not to be confused with the Vance and Hines fuel pack and that type of stuff.
Sure.
That's like the race team.
Right. Yeah.
So we do some stuff with them, and that makes some serious power. Those guys have been doing that forever. And they're one of the top V-twin racing, drag racing,
for
flat
like
track.
HRA
Anything. And even, King of the Baggers, they're...
How big of valves are you putting in over stock?
+2 mm overstock is...
Okay, so you're doing that, and then are you doing any kind of like crazy pouring, or you're just like kind of like matching your intake and exhaust and smoothing it out? Or?
So it's a little bigger, and one of the things that I've noticed in those is that if you go too big, you lose velocity in the intake, and then you're kind of you'll still have more power than what you had, but the right porting and the right velocity and all that is, bigger is not better in that case.
I would agree, and a lot of people don't understand what you were just saying about velocity, because obviously air is traveling in and out of a motor at any given time. It needs to be in and out of there in a certain amount of time, and these big openings kind of let air kind of lose their certain turbulence, because you actually want like a certain amount of turbulence in the air. It keeps the air cooler and more dense. I mean, there's so much behind it that we can't get into today. But so you're oversizing the valves. I'm guessing you guys got to put upgraded springs in, right?
Yeah. Like a stock M8 Harley, you can really only go to a 485 lift safely.
Yeah.
depending on your riding style, we'll pick a cam, and there's a lot. I mean, I could talk for hours and hours and hours
No,
about
I know.
cam
Yeah.
selection. You got timing of events, so your opening and closing angles, your duration, and stuff like that, and
Right.
that all directly affects your compression ratio. You open and close the valves sooner or later. You're letting compression out, keeping it in too long.
Yeah.
So your compression ratio to your cam selection is really huge. Like, I mean, everything comes together to make the big numbers. And we've tested a lot of stuff to be able to get the most you can out of it.
Right, and a lot of people don't understand this either because you've always got guys that somehow have been led to believe that you can have all this performance and you can also have like this Toyota reliability to things, and it's just not the case.
Right.
Especially if you really want to go to the limits of what you know.
It's difficult, and like our race engines are, they're not exactly the same as like what we would use for street, because we're running race fuel.
Yeah,
We're only expecting that motor to last so long. If it lasts
sure.
us a season, you know that, to me, that's what I can do. Some of these bigger teams, their motors are only lasting them the day, and
And they
they're,
got the budget for it.
yeah, they have the budget, they have the
But that
backing.
actually kind of proves my point because if you want to make every last fraction of a horsepower, it's there. But every time you go further and further, you're hurting that reliability. So for a smaller race team like you guys, and we will get into Scott's race team in a moment here. For you guys, this motor needs to last at least a little while. And I know they don't always. And I blew up a motor last year. You blew up your own motor in your own bike last year.
Yep.
And anybody that wants to say shit about it, I don't give a shit because if you're not blowing up your motor, you're not even trying. You
Right.
know,
Right.
I really do believe that, and I really don't try to lead my customers down that road because most of my customers would be better served by a reliable motor that runs great and maybe like a hot rod tune at most, but something that really makes sense on the street.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so my engine that I blew up over the summer, I was basically testing what some of the stock components could handle. I put a big bore on it and pushed it with a stock crankshaft, a bunch of other stock components, and that's how I learned that, hey, if we're doing a big bore and if you're targeting a certain horsepower range, like goes back to that solid foundation crankshaft. Like,
sure,
we you
yeah.
know we have to do that. And I know some stuff's built better than others. They say if it's built on a Monday or a Friday, or it.
That is true. There is a huge difference between you can have two parts in your hand, and one could last a day and one could last 100 years. It's funny how that works, but all my years working in dealers, it's like you'd always have that one machine you'd unbox and it would blow up on the first day. My last job, we had a side by side and set it all up, and driving it to go just to put a couple gallons in it, and it blew the crank up. And ended up being that the oil pump was never bolted in the factory.
Yeah.
So you're always going to run into that. We're getting close on time. I think that we will go a little bit over time so that we can talk about the race team a little bit. And I still want to ask you some other questions. Uh, and then I think, if we do well and people are enjoying the podcast and stuff, I 100% would like to have you back to go more in depth on some of this stuff. So from the point that you got into Harley Performance, and now you're actually like reaching your own destiny because Harleys will make you a sitting duck. They don't accelerate. They don't brake. They don't handle very well. Now you've got your own business where you're putting suspension on these Harleys, upgrading the brakes, building the motors to the absolute limit, and now you're in the Bagger Racing series, correct?
Yeah.
Which
So
is a pretty new series and a pretty wild idea for whoever came up with it. So tell me how that all got started, and tell me a little bit about your experience running the race team and your role in it, and everything like that.
Yeah, so when, you know, Rob Bidos that runs Bagger Racing League now, he came up with kind of the crazy idea of let's put these baggers on a road course. And I mean, going back, my one rider, he was a sport bike racer, and he was getting into dirt bikes, and I kind of took him under my wing to help him, be doing the right things on the dirt bike. And one day he was like, hey, do you want to do a track day on my sport bike? Like, there was like a rookie day where it was like half price for you and the rookie that you brought. So and me and him are similar in size, so we had an extra set of leathers. He's like, I got everything, we'll just go and you hit the track on my sport bike. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'd love to do that.
What was he riding?
So I think it was a 2013 ZX6, like
okay,
full race
Craig's
prep.
got vintage. You're talking about Craig, right?
Yeah.
Craig is my Snap-on guy.
Yeah, which
and a great guy. I've known him for about the same time as Scott.
So he had this ZX6, and he had this, Olin's shock and forks on it, like nice track bike.
Sure.
And he had this big red Alpine Star leather suit that he's like, this is my old suit, you take it. And we went to that track day, and I remember I'm 6'1", 6'2", and I was real cramped up on that sport bike. And at the time I had a Harley, I had the Harley, and I was like, man, I think I'd rather be on my Harley than this sport bike. Like, I just was more comfortable on it. And, I said that and kind of thought about it. And I'm like, man, maybe I should do a track day on my Harley. It'd be cool. And, nothing ever came of it. So then when they came out with this crazy Bagger Racing League thing, I was like, I'm going to build myself a bike. And, I put a ton of thought into it. And they had the first race where basically guys were riding like a +2 suspension Harley. Okay. And I was like, I know I can make that bike way higher. Sure. I'm going to make the bike higher, and I'm going to go and race. And at the time I was planning on racing myself. So I started building this bike, and, everybody comes in the shop. What is that thing? That's crazy. And, I ended up actually using Suzuki V-Strom 1000 forks on it because...
For the length?
Yeah, for the length. So basically I was at +4.
Okay.
+4 inch. And, I had... somebody had given me some ZX6 wheels, and one of my friends machined me some brake adapters to fit on, and I had all sorts of crazy stuff going on with it. And basically I tore my quad, and I couldn't bend enough to put my feet on the foot pegs, which I made custom made rear sets and a custom exhaust and like all sorts of just crazy stuff on this bike. And going back to that, basically it came down to it. Like, I'm like, man, I can't ride this thing. I just can't sit on it. And Craig was one of my only friends that I knew that really had sport bike experience, but he kind of retired from racing for a few years.
Sure.
So I called him up, and I'm like, kind of told him the crazy idea that, hey, I got this Harley bagger that I'm basically making into a sport bike.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you want to drive out to Utah and race this thing? And he kind of just, he's a motorcycle enthusiast as well.
Yeah.
And, he was like, yeah, I'll do it. And I think, if you talk to him, he thought I was some kind of pipe dream. And then, I called him up the one day, hey, come over to the shop and sit on the bike so I can figure out where you're comfortable with the handlebars and all that stuff. And, he shows up, and it was like, oh my God, what is this thing? Like, and so we ended up driving out to Utah, and we get there, and everybody else's bikes all of a sudden are just as high as mine. And I'm like, oh man, everybody caught up. So like, I thought I had the one up on everybody.
So when they first started the series, you thought easily, oh, I can outdo these. But by the time you were in it, everybody else had kind of had the same idea.
Everybody else had that amount of evolution, and they were racing with the radio still in it and everything. And I had built this. I had built like a fairing bracket that literally just held the outer fairing. There was no, the bare bones wiring harness. Like, I had the bike down to, I think, 630 35 pounds from
Okay.
probably in
About
the
9,
800s.
8 or 9. Yeah. Okay.
And, we went there, and Craig had, the crazy thing was he had never ridden a Harley prior to that race.
Yeah.
We had a small motor in it because I was like, we're going to have enough lean angle. Nobody's going to be able to touch us.
Because you could maintain the corner speed.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
he went out there, never rode an unbelievable amount of laps during practice. Every second he could be out on the track, he was out on the track.
Yeah.
And, we had really never ridden the bike, so I didn't know if it would be stable. I didn't know a lot about it. And we
Sure.
just made this crazy 30 some hour drive. And the bike, the whole weekend, I didn't, other than putting a couple new sets of tires on it because we were wearing them out, I didn't have to touch a tool. It was a great weekend at a great facility. Craig finished like mid pack, which was great for us.
First time out
for
on a
us,
bike that's never been tested on the track. Yeah.
Basically having a 110 horsepower engine that
Yeah.
is, I mean, it's evolved so much from 4 years ago now that, I mean, if you don't have 150 plus, you're not even competitive.
So from that point to now, you guys are actually racing multiple bikes now, right?
Yeah. So then, as my typical self, I get really into stuff. And, we had a couple sponsors, and, the guy at Geezer Engineering said, hey, I have this other bike here, I'll send it to you if you will use it to race.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, let's do it. And he kind of said, well, who do you have for a racer? And I'm like, I'm not sure yet. And that's where our second racer came from. Is Emilio was one of my friends that he was always around the shop. He was a really good Harley stunt rider, one of the originals from our area, who's very, very talented.
And he's a really good dude too.
Yeah, he's awesome.
I see him out from time to time. He's just one of the nicest guys you come across.
But I kind of knew him from racing dirt bikes back in the day.
Yeah.
And he would always joke, let me take out Craig's bike. And I called him up the one day, and I'm like, hey, like, you always joke about wanting to ride this bagger, like, I kind of got another one, and if you're interested in racing, like, you're in. And he kind of was like, yeah, I want to do that. And
he's pretty fast too.
Yeah, he's very, very fast now.
A lot of times the guys that can really do stunts, I mean, they can almost do anything on a bike, because if you can do that stuff, going around some swoopy corners, like, no big deal. And it's, and I'm not a stunt rider, and I know you play around with a little stuff here and there, but clutch, throttle control, being able to put the bike where you want it. I mean, it's the same no matter what you're doing with it,
So I would say my best description of Emilio's riding is he's very comfortable being uncomfortable. So he's able to push it. And then Craig is a very calculated technical rider, and he basically took Emilio under his wing and said, hey, you need to do this line. Let's get your body position right. Like, I mean, everything worked out really well because he had Craig, who is a really great coach to him. And then, he kind of has the balls to let it hang out.
Yeah.
And, that combination, he's just been amazing.
And so how many seasons have you already completed with this series? 2 or 3?
So we've done, me and Craig together have done 3, and then the both of us did the next 2.
With 2 riders?
With 2 riders. Yeah. And then this year I am actually in the process of building Emilio a newer bike. And his old bike, one of our friends, Shredder Bob, we call him, he was a big twin. He had a race Dyna. He won the championship a couple years ago on that. And, we kind of always pitted together. We became good friends. I'd help him out in the pits, and, anything we needed, he'd help when we had the 2 bikes, get the bikes off the stands and tire warmers when he was available. And, basically I was building Emilio a new bike. So his old bike, I'm like, am I going to retire it? Am I going to sell it? Am I going to part it out?
I think last time we talked, you were thinking about just keeping it as a spare in case you needed a spare bike.
Yeah. So then it kind of, I was talking to Bob the one day, and he wanted to get into a bagger, but he'd recently had a kid, and he's like, I don't really have the money to do it at the time. It's just a lot having a new kid. So I kind of that was brewing in my head for a few days, and then I called him back, and I was like, hey, you want to race Emilio's old bagger? Like, it's already there, it's already together, like, and he was on board. So
you have 3 bikes on the field this year.
So yeah, lucky me, we're gonna field 3 bikes, and I'll make it happen. It's gonna be difficult, but.
And at the end of the day, I mean, a couple farm boys from Lockport, New York, you guys are doing fine at your shop. Obviously, I'm not saying that you're not, but you guys are going against like factory teams that have no budget limitations at all. They've got specific people, and their full-time job is just to go work with this race team, where you're working 40 hours a week and then you're going out on the weekends. And you guys have done really well despite that. Am I wrong there?
Yeah, so there's a couple different. So there's Moto America series, which that's like kind of that's where Factory Harley's at, and we're in BRL, which is one. It's a step below that, but that's kind of the stepping stone to get into that.
Sure.
So we're not going against the factory teams. But we're definitely lower budget than most. Yeah.
Does Indian Factory compete as well? They do, right?
The Indian Factory, they only do Moto America, but we actually raced against one of them. They came to the Loudon Classic. They had a V-twin race, and
was that last year?
That was last year.
So you guys did well against him, I think, right?
Yeah, it's not even, we're not on the same level, but it's cool to see those guys share the track with somebody like that. That's a really, really good rider on a really good bike, and
just
great.
Just to be out there with these guys. It's cool.
Yeah,
it's almost like an honor in itself just to be there with these guys.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy that we're in the same pits with some of the past Superbike, MotoGP champions, some of the legends of the sport. So that's really cool, and they're all really great people that they come up and they talk to us, like give advice, and it's really great. And
that's good, man. And how many races do you have planned for this coming year? You guys do about 8 or so?
So last year we did, I don't even know, too many.
Okay.
This year we're cutting it back to about 4.
Okay.
I'm trying to get back out on the dirt bike and do some riding myself. So, some of the races, we go all the way to California a couple times, and it's hard to get away from the shop to do that, us being a smaller shop.
Sure, because the shop's basically paying for a lot of this race fund. Sure.
Yeah.
I know you guys have sponsors, but at the end of the day, the shop's paying for it, whether it's writing a check or whether it's letting you go off.
Yeah. Just letting me go away in the middle of summer is difficult, but we make it happen. We get our work done when we're there, and
I would love to talk to you all day, and honestly, we'll probably press stop on this recording and probably still talk for another hour. I could talk to you all day. You're one of my favorite people to talk to. People always tell me about Scott, oh, he's so quiet. And I said, well, that's because you don't know how to talk bikes. Because once you get Scott going, you can talk to him all day, and he's one of the most intelligent guys in the area, one of the most humble and just nice guys in the area, in the industry. We've always worked well together. We try to send each other work and work well with other shops in the area, and try to keep all the guys in the local industry as tight as we can. I got 10 fun questions for you, Scott. And you can give me any answers you want, and nobody will judge you, okay? The first one I'm going to judge you on, though. What is your favorite tool in your toolbox?
So that's a good one, but I think I've known this forever, is that I actually have a snap-on. It's like a door panel popper.
That is my answer too, motherfucker. It's got the fork at the end.
Yeah, it's got the fork in the end. When you got to slide a hose off something, it's perfect. I know.
Pry bar. It is good for hoses, dude. I reach for it every
I
5
know,
minutes.
sorry, Craig, that I know we're not supposed to use it for a pry bar, but it makes a pretty
It's a
good
good
one.
pry bar. It's got nice soft edges, so you're not gonna like fuck up whatever you're prying against. And it's just got a dude. I if somebody asked me that question, I would have said the same thing.
I should
so
know.
It's funny to hear
I should know the part number, but that's definitely it.
I've only ever had to buy one. So I definitely don't know the part number, but maybe I'll maybe we'll do another we'll do a feature just on that one tool. My second question is a very specific one for you. Would you rather build a motor or an engine?
Well, a motor is electric, which I could do that. I've done that, but I would rather build an engine, a gas engine.
So basically, an engine runs on gasoline or diesel or some kind of liquid fuel. A motor is something that is powered by electricity and copper wires coiled around. Okay, that makes sense. And you've been saying that for years. That's why I had to put that one. Favorite bike that you've ridden but never owned one?
Oh, that's a tough one. Favorite bike that I've ridden? Probably people might hate on me for this, but I think like a Goldwing 1800. They're
It's not a bad bike.
They're a very good handling, good power. They actually do not feel heavy when you're riding it.
No, it's the
They're
most well balanced machine out there.
I would say, just thinking quick, that's probably my go-to would be a newer Goldwing.
For me, it's got to be a Hayabusa. Anytime I'm on one, I'm like, good God. But probably better I don't have one. What's your least favorite bike that you have owned?
My least favorite bike that I have owned, that definitely I know the answer without even thinking about it. I had a 2007 Suzuki RMZ 450 Ricky Carmichael edition. I blew out my knee on it, and I don't know if I just hated it because of that. And it had a 4-speed transmission on it. That was actually my first 450, so I think I would always try to override it. It would always, no matter what I did, I couldn't get the suspension to work the way I wanted it. And it could have been subconscious that it hurt me, and that's why I didn't like it. But that's definitely my least favorite bike I've owned.
All right, that makes sense. So for helmets, full face, 3/4, half helmet, or no helmet? What are you reaching for?
You'll probably never catch me not wearing a full face helmet. Generally, I get a little carried away riding, so just safety is really important to me. And it should be for everybody, because when you're out on the street, you never know what's going to happen. Stuff might not be your fault. You hit the ground, like, I can't afford to be any more ugly. So the full face helmet is definitely my go-to.
That's why it's an audio podcast, folks. What is the perfect bike for a beginner to learn on?
Well,
out of any bike out there,
a beginner bike. I mean, anybody that knows me knows that I'm going to say, as a joke, probably a CBR 1000. But in all reality, I think like an XR 100 is probably the ultimate beginner bike
for like basic fundamentals,
to learn how to use the clutch, learn how to shift, all that stuff. And I own one myself to this day. They're one of the funnest bikes and one of the best bikes to learn on safely.
Yeah. Okay. Goofiest motorcycle accessory you've ever seen?
Wow. That could be a million things, but you get some crazy stuff on some of these guys' Harleys that I've seen. So the Kiriakin Hypercharger is probably I don't know about goofiest, but I think that would be my least.
It would qualify as goofy.
That's my least favorite thing possible.
It's an aesthetic upgrade disguised as a performance upgrade.
Yes.
I would agree with you on that, and they do look cool. Certainly not the best if you really actually want true performance. longest motorcycle trip you've ever been on, and I'm not talking about putting your race bikes in a trailer to California. I'm talking about you did the miles.
Oh, so I do ride a touring bike as my primary bike. I really have never ridden super far. I mean, probably only like 400 miles. And
That's not too bad, yeah. Okay.
that's, I get bored. If you got to get on the highway, I get bored. I'd rather hit some twisties or go to the track.
Yeah.
But, I enjoy being on the bike, but just not for that long.
No, I definitely get bored on long trips. Like a lot of times, if I want to actually ride, I'm going out by myself, half hour to 45 minutes. I'm breaking every traffic law I can find, and then I'm back home, and it's all out of my system, and that's it. Highway riding, man. It's bad enough in a car or a truck, and you're on a bike. It's just straight line, and there's nothing going on, but nothing to look at besides cows and corn.
Yeah, I would say I'm in the same boat on that.
Yeah.
It's not about the quantity of the ride; it's about the quality of the ride.
100%, yeah. Which are you more likely to say? It's too hot to ride or it's too cold to ride?
Well, both.
Would you be more likely to say?
I don't like being cold, so unless it's been a long winter break that I haven't been on a bike in 3-4 months, I'd maybe go off for a ride in the 40s, but
Yeah.
70s ideal for me.
So yeah, I think you're right. 60s and 70s is about ideal. I don't even really mind a hot day, but yeah. So final question: if you had to ride a scooter, what make and model scooter would you choose?
So it's funny that you asked me that because I actually own a scooter
Come on.
that I live pretty close to the shop, so it's easier to ride that back and forth. And I got it for a pit vehicle at the road race courses because sometimes it's far.
Oh, that makes
So
sense. Yeah.
I have a Yamaha C3. It's a 50cc liquid cooled, fuel injected, awesome scooter. They normally only you're not required a driver's license for it, so it was limited to 30 miles an hour from the factory. I think mine is a '07.
Okay.
A customer actually came in with it for an inspection last year, and I offered him $1,000 for it, and he said, "Yeah, if you give me a ride home." So that's how I ended up with it, and it's basically a cooler with wheels.
Well, I'm a little disappointed you didn't say Honda Spree, but I guess that's okay. You've always been more sympathetic to Yamaha than myself. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, Scott. If people are interested in this first season that I'm going to put out on YouTube, Spotify, and SoundCloud, I definitely would love to have you back and be able to take more time to really get deeper into some of these things we talked about. But since we're already 22 minutes over my projected time, we're going to wrap it up. Motorcycle Transmissions 1 through 6 are available now on YouTube, Spotify, and SoundCloud. Until next time, enjoy the miles.